Good morning, everyone. Before I reflect on World Environment Day, I'd like to share a contemporary reading with you. This comes from George Monbiot's book, Out of the Wreckage. Listen for a hint of the prayer of St. Francis in the reading. On this crowded planet, we are disconnected from each other as never before. There is an epidemic of unhappiness and of psychological and physical illness. The atomization we suffer has eroded our common sense of purpose and sapped our belief that by working together we can change life for the better. It has undermined democracy and allowed intolerant and violent forces to fill the political vacuum. We are trapped in a vicious circle of alienation and rejection. By coming together to revive community life, we, the heroes of this story, can break the vicious circle. Through invoking the two great healing forces, togetherness and belonging, we can rediscover the central facts of our humanity, our altruism and mutual aid. Where there is atomization, we will create a thriving civic life. Where there is alienation, we will forge a new sense of belonging to neighbours, neighbourhood and society. Where we find ourselves crushed between market and state, we will develop a new economics that treats both people and planet with respect. Where we are ignored and exploited, we will revive democracy and retrieve politics from those who have captured it. In doing so, we can reclaim our happiness, reclaim our self-reliance, reclaim our pride, and reclaim our place. We will belong once more both to society and to ourselves. I propose a name for this story, the politics of belonging. Though I do not seek to disguise my own inclinations, my aim is to reach anyone to whom a generous, inclusive politics might appeal. I hope that the story I have told has the potential to speak to people of all denominations. And that's from Out of the Wreckage by George Monbiot. So, sometimes I find myself counting heads on a Sunday morning. Are there going to be enough of us to keep afloat week after week, year after year? Enough to keep the institution of the church viable? But a few weeks ago, when I read an article from the Guardian website by political scientist and respected environmental advocate Maya Hillman, I stopped worrying. The article was about the predicted tenure of human civilization as we know it, which he calmly sets at the end of this century. This article shook the foundations of my castles in the air and made everything look different for a little while. For as long as my mind could hold on to the concept that Bach and Shakespeare and Confucius and Socrates, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, really might dissolve, and within the lifetime of my grandchildren. So powerful is the denial that we have built into our civilization that it was only for a few days that I could look at trees, forests, entire ecosystems, and see their precarious state and our own. I do know cerebrally that our comfortable materialist society is careering towards a precipice. If the church is not to lose its salt, if we are to emit light in these dark ages, then our concern cannot be our numbers. The preservation of life is preliminary to any passing of the torch of our religious tradition. If we are to offer anything to the world, to our city or our fellow citizens, we have to offer a way forward for our planet. Whatever we conceive God to be, there can be no single more important way of loving God than striving to protect life on earth. Love is the end, the means and the vision. To love others, we must labour for the survival of the only place there is to live. If we are to stop climate collapse, the world needs a new narrative, one that is able to articulate the state of our earth and not despair, because we hold one another in community, valuing each other above goods and comfort. Now we fiddle while Rome burns, but this need not be so. As George Monbiot says, in his gentle echo of the prayer of St. Francis, we can and must be a cradle of belonging, affirming, nurturing, and demanding justice in its myriad guises, personal and political, our eyes fixed joyfully on the race before us, the survival of the earth. Incidentally, if we do so, the Church will find itself more important than ever before. I do not think that numbers will be a problem. And if we do so, the coracle of our Church will indeed become an ark.
So, Lizzie has shared two perspectives there. The alarmism of Mayor Hillman and many others. Then the other perspective is George Monbiot, echoing St. Francis, more or less. Where there is darkness, let me sow light. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Maybe these are two sides of a zipper, and we actually need to be prompted in this world of distractions about what really matters and how to respond. How can we take that prompt of despair and harness it to hope for the sake of our brothers, sisters, and all our grandchildren? Well, first and most importantly, let's celebrate what we're already doing as individuals and as a faith community. We've marched in support of climate action. We've hosted our Pacific Island neighbours and heard their stories and seen their celebration amidst the worries that they have. Some of us have pledged $1 a week towards Pitt Street's Green Energy Fund, although we do need some more pledges. Some of us have adopted worm farming. In a community like this, talking about a topic like this, I have such a strong sense that everyone's sitting here, as I do, thinking, well, I feel like I'm doing everything I can. But if we think of it as a journey, and there's always the next step we could take, and there's lots of sources of help. And, you know, Mark and Tom Delaney's book describes from a really interesting perspective of their background how it can be challenging, how it can even be fun, and certainly community building to keep considering our behaviour and think about that. But even so, our actions individually or even as a community can seem a little trivial. Are they really making any difference, given the scale of the issue that we're facing? Well, Pitt Street's also part of ARC, going back to Lizzie's comment about our church being an ARC. But in this case, ARC stands for Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. And that encompasses all of the faith communities working together to address this issue. And through our membership of ARC, we can be part of a global interfaith campaign called Living the Change. So this gives us a way to count up all of those tiny little changes that seem so insignificant when we make them. But together they can really add up. And by doing that, it provides us with two things. Firstly, we can therefore speak with credibility. All these faith leaders, and I hope you'll go and have a look and have a listen to some of the stories, they're really sharing their personal stories, including how hard it is to make these extra steps in lifestyle changes in food, travel, energy use. But secondly, this initiative brings us together as a global grassroots faith community. That means we can send a collective message to global leaders when they meet in September. What we can say is there may be many diverse faith perspectives, but we all share the common call to tread lightly on this God-given earth. And we are acting on it. So listen up.
World Environment Day is like something's too big for us to concentrate on. So I'd like to take you with me to Bangladesh and give the global perspective. One of the most wonderful people I met through my radio interviews was Dr. Salim ul Haq. He's a climate scientist, and he contributed to something called the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change. It was similar to the Pope's declaration in Laudato Si, which influenced people around the world to get moving. His positive attitude springs from a deep humanity. I was so impressed by him because he talked also about the refugees that had come into Bangladesh that year while they were flooding. Bangladesh was 2/3 underwater, and on the east from Burma, Myanmar, there were over 500,000 refugees, desperate people coming in, and Bangladesh has just absorbed them, looked after them. Meanwhile, in the north, all around the Bangladesh border is an armed wall, a guarded wall where people patrol from India to keep the Bangladeshi climate refugees out. So there's not a migration to India, and that wall reminds them that they're alone in handling the problem. But Dr. Huck, when I spoke to him, was expansive. He was a climate scientist, he had all the information, he goes to all the world conferences, but he had total positive belief in a kind of can-do attitude and what they were already doing. He said, we're already feeding 125 million people, what's another 500,000? Which really took my breath away. His message for us is that we in the West should rethink our role as donors. Australians are very good at giving to sort of Red Cross appeals when there's a flood or an earthquake, but he said, don't think of yourself as a donor, think of yourself as a partner. And he said the global solutions are something we have to do in partnership. The climate change is affecting us now, we're on the front line, but you in Australia are experiencing droughts, and you will be definitely knowing that climate change is hitting you eventually. So I'd like you to just listen to a little tiny bit of Dr. Salim ul Haq's interview, and then I'll finish.
I think that's wonderful that you've also written about how people used to consider themselves as donors, but they should really consider themselves as partners. And climate change is the mega problem that has put us into this basket where we share. The one thing we share is the biosphere, and we're all responsible for it. And I wonder, Australians are very keen to donate if there's a crisis, but they don't see themselves as the cause of the crisis, and our government certainly doesn't see our emissions in any of the way we've been talking about here, in a moral way or as a criminal thing. We're gung-ho, exporting coal and gas here. And I'd like you to just give a message to Australians, for people who are in a rich country exporting fossil fuels, how we're connected to you and how we could be in more of a partnership, because I think from all that you've said today, you really have a lot to offer, and adaptation is one big part of it, but we have to do the mitigation on our side. So what do you have to say to us?
Sure. So my message, it's not about leaving it to the governments to do what is supposed to be done, but for each and every one of us to do our part. And there are 3 steps that need to be taken to do that at the very individual level. Firstly, understand the problem and realize that it is a real problem, and recognize that it's a real problem. If you live in denial, then you're not going to do anything about it. Secondly, once you do understand the problem, figure out what it is that you might be able to do. And what you can do depends on who you are. If you're a radio journalist, you do it in your journalism. If you're a student, you do it in what you study. If you work for a company, you get your company to take actions. So there are a million ways in which individuals can act collectively and individually to raise awareness and to take actions. And in particular, if you live in a rich country like Australia, or you're a rich person, even living in a country like Bangladesh, then you are a much bigger part of the problem than the other people, the poorer people on the planet. Your emissions, the emissions due to your own lifestyle, and my lifestyle, I'm self-critical about this as well, are causing problems. The pollution we cause by emissions of greenhouse gases is not a victimless pollution. It just doesn't go into the atmosphere and then nothing else happens. It hurts people around the planet, and many of the people it's hurting are citizens of my country in Bangladesh, in coastal Bangladesh. They live there. They are being affected, as I just described. And so the third and final step is for each individual, once you've taken the first and second steps of accepting the problem and wanting to do something about them, is to reach out to those people. And, on the one hand, you need to reduce your emissions, but you're not going to be able to reduce them to zero. So you have to take responsibility for the victims of your emissions. And by taking responsibility, I don't want your money. I want you to engage. I want you to find out about them. And if you want to find out about people in Bangladesh, get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with them. And we'll together find solutions to tackle a global problem by acting together in solidarity. It's not about you giving money to the victims. It's about you empathizing with them and working together to solve what is a global problem, which will affect you as much as it will affect us. It's just affecting us earlier than it's affecting you. What we are asking for is the polluter should pay for the pollution that they're causing. At the moment, they're getting away scot-free. Not only that, they're making profits.
Yeah.
And in particular, what we would brand as a criminal act is prospecting for more coal and fossil fuels. If somebody's going out looking for more, like they're doing in the North Pole now, then that is a criminal act. Why are you going to go and look for more fossils to burn them when you know that this is now an absolutely bad thing to do? So, I think the tide has turned in terms of seeing them as benign companies. They're not benign companies anymore. They're quite, they're verging on the criminals. And most importantly, I would say, is use our human resources as our assets, and particularly our younger human boys and girls as tremendous assets. They are as intelligent and capable as any children anywhere in the world. And if we can invest in them to make them into intelligent, good citizens and productive citizens, and then the sky is the limit in terms of what Bangladesh could do. We don't have to think about them as simply farming land, but as problem solvers. And that reverts back to the point I made about the children coming from Myanmar.
Yes.
We need to think of them as productive human beings whom we can invest in, rather than destitute human beings whom we have to look after.
Exactly.
That entire mentality of looking after people and they're a burden to us is the wrong mentality to approach them.
So that was Dr. Salim ul Haq in Bangladesh, and straight after that broadcast, this was last September in the floods, someone from UTS University rang Dr. ul Haq and offered to collaborate with him, exchanging students. So sometimes, you throw a seed out, as we're hearing today, and it starts to flourish. So thank you for listening to him. And I'd just like to finish by saying, right now, in the Vatican, the Pope is meeting those oil executives. There's a closed meeting I heard about yesterday with ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell and other investors. There's a closed meeting with the Pope and his climate scientists, trying to persuade them to fund the transition, to turn around the ship. As Dr. Salim ul Haq said, it's a crime to go on drilling for the fossils. Lizzie talked about preservation of life. And I'd like you to think of those millions of Bangladeshis every year flooded out and not just lying down and taking it. They have 5 million people with megaphones who go around to the villages and warn each other warn people that there's a flood coming. They have provision for livestock. They are on the front foot. They're not just saying, let the government do something about it. They themselves are doing it. So the restoration narrative that we heard about from Monbiot is not just about restoring safe life for people, it's also about biodiversity, it's about sharks, it's about plankton, it's about mountain ash trees, it's biodiversity, safe habitat for all life to live. And I think World Environment Day gives us a chance to think about that. So let's all talk about restoration in everything we can do. You can join the Pitt Street Green Fund Gerard said we haven't got enough people. I think only 15 out of the needed 50 people have subscribed, so that's just $1 a week to help Pitt Street have a green fund. There's also a little leaf that you're going to be told about in a moment, and I'm going to write on my leaf that I'm just going to look up the website that Gerard told us and work with that, living the change, because there's so many ideas that we can do, and we can encourage each other to take those. So write your pledge on the leaf and consider the Green Fund and consider living the change.